So around that time, my brothers and my mom and I decided to leave, and we were not going to church anywhere for a couple of years. And what happened in between that time was that the elementary school I'd been going to, the program for the visually impaired in my school district was only at one school, at least for elementary. And then the program moved to a different school. And so when we moved to the different school, my mom got involved with the PTA there, and she was talking to one of her friends about church, on the subject of church. And so her friend invited us to her church. And so we really liked it a lot. We started attending there. And it was when I was in 7th grade, got involved with the youth group. I can remember watching our youth group leader as he was, his life is amazing to watch. He lives for the Lord, and I started to watch that. And I remember finding out one Sunday that he was going to be leaving our church and going for a full-time job as a youth pastor. My church, it was volunteer, and he felt called to go into full-time youth ministry at that point. So he left our church, but before he left, one of our last trips was to a Christian music festival in Buffalo. And when we went, I remember the last night of the trip, we were all kind of just sitting around talking about how God had impacted our lives during the trip, and I just felt this nudge from God telling me that, I just felt God drawing me to himself. So I went to our youth pastor after our evening session, and I told him that I wanted to give my life to Christ. And so he had prayed for me and prayed with me to come to Christ. And I didn't understand everything, and I still don't understand everything. All I know, the biggest thing that I knew at that point was that God had taken my physical sight away ultimately to lead me to spiritual sight. Because there's so many common denominators between my blindness and the school that I went to, the visually impaired program being moved from one school to another school, to my mom meeting this friend who invited us to her church. If I hadn't been blind, I wouldn't have been in that particular school, and my mom might not have met that particular friend. I'm not saying that things wouldn't have worked out still for me to become a Christian, but I can see God's hand working in my life through these different events. And so the biggest thing that I knew at that point was that God led me to spiritual sight. And I think of the verse in John chapter 9, I believe it's verse 3. Or verse 2 or 3, I don't have the Bible right in front of me right now, but I know that the beginning of the chapter starts off, Jesus and the disciples are walking along, and they see this blind man by the side of the road. And the disciples ask him, Rabbi, what happened? Why was this man born blind? Did his parents sin, or did he sin that caused him to be born blind? And Jesus says, no, it wasn't a result of his sin or his parents' sin, but he was born this way so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. And I remember when I read that verse, I was like, that is cool, because it's exactly how it was for me. I believe wholeheartedly that the reason I was born blind was so that God's works might be displayed in my life. And I always say one of my other favorite verses is Psalm 119, verse 71. It was good for me to be afflicted that I might learn your decrees. And Romans 8:28. We know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. And so that was something that really encouraged me. And as I've gone through good times and hard times in my Christian walk and just in life in general, there's a lot of things that God's taught me, and I'll just highlight a couple. One of the biggest things that was encouraging to me is that basically my entire life is is an act of faith. My entire life, everything that I do from day to day is walking by faith. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7. We walk by faith and not by sight. And I see that played out in so many areas of my life. Basically, I have to trust when I'm walking with somebody, not using my cane, that they're going to lead me properly, and that they're not going to run me downstairs or into a wall or what have you. Even with a cane, I have to trust that my cane is going to protect me, that I'm going to use my cane properly, it's going to protect me so that I don't run myself into something. I can't see these things, but I trust. And it's the same way with God, even though I do believe that God has made himself evident. But the Bible does say no one has seen God. We have not physically seen God, but we see him through creation. We see him through his word. We see him through the way he works in people's lives. And though I cannot see God, I can see the way that he's worked, and that is a really encouraging thing to me. And one of the other really encouraging things to me is the idea that I have the enormous privilege of not having any physical distractions when I meet people. I get to know people for who they are, and don't have any preconceived notions about them through what I see, because I don't see anything. So I just think that's a really cool thing, to look at the heart of people. And the final thing I want to share is that, yes, being blind has its hard moments, for sure. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that, I'm this, incredible person because I'm happy with being blind. But I am happy with being blind. I have no problems with being blind. And anybody who knows me can attest to that fact. The humor that I have about it, the way that God has so blessed me with being able to make people feel comfortable around me. Because I know sometimes people don't know what to say or what to do. And I'm not easily offended. I will joke about my blindness all day long. All day long, I will. And so for me, the biggest thing I can say is that, I guess two biggest things I can say. One, I don't know everything. I don't know all the answers to life's questions. But I can say that this I do know. I was blind, but now I see. That's also from John chapter 9, where Jesus healed the blind man. Now, Jesus has not, as of yet, healed me physically. I don't know if that's his will for me or not. But even if he doesn't, the biggest thing I can say, and I'll end with this, is that I would much rather be physically blind and have spiritual sight than to be physically sighted and be spiritually blind. So this is just some things I wanted to share with you, and I thank you for taking the time to watch and putting up with my stuttering as I'm trying to figure out what to say. But I pray that this blesses you, and